If you're part of the University of Georgia family, you know Loran Smith. He came to Athens from the small middle Georgia town of Wrightsville some 65 years ago on a track scholarship and quickly became the team captain. He could have had no idea when he was an 18-year-old athlete that he would spend the rest of his life in Athens in various roles with the University of Georgia and become one of the most beloved figures in University of Georgia history. He worked with the legendary Dan McGill as the Assistant Sports Information Director for years, gaining experience that would shape his career. He's been involved in various broadcasting and media roles, including producing the Football Coaches television show, hosting post-game locker room shows, and co-hosting the popular pre-game tailgate show. Additionally, Loran has served as the business manager for the UGA Athletic Association and executive director of the Georgia Bulldog Club, which involves fundraising activities for university athletics. Loran has authored over a dozen books, establishing himself as a University of Georgia athletics historian. He has written too many articles to count for various publications and newspapers and has been a syndicated radio host for many years. Additionally, he is a much-in-demand public speaker, delighting audiences with all things Georgia football and other Georgia athletics. Among other things, he is about to give his perspective on the late great Bulldog radio announcer Larry Munson and include his take on Scott Howard and the team that took Munson's place. Loran will also talk about his friendship with Fran Tarkenton and give his unique insight into Vince Dooley and the recruitment of the great Herschel Walker. He will tell us what makes Kirby successful and his take on the name, image, and likeness dilemma in college football. Loran will also talk about a couple of the many books he has authored and introduce us to the latest he is finishing now. He is known to the University of Georgia family for many reasons, but what made him famous was when he was the sideline reporter for the University of Georgia radio broadcast. Who remembers these familiar words from Larry Munson? Loran, what do you got?
Ball in the 21, they got to go to the 4 for a first down. 4th and 17. I know I'm asking a lot, you guys, but hunker it down one more time. Ronnie Harris and Jeff Sanchez got up in the air. We had pressure up the middle. They pressured the quarterback, one man in the middle and one from the flank. They pressured him. And now everybody's roaring 3, 2, 1, and they're carrying Vince Dooley off the field. Loran, what do you got?
Viewing life from a hearse, it could be worse. Laugh, think, and cry with the country undertaker.
This is Bruce Goddard, and you're listening to the View from a Hearse podcast. I've got with me a University of Georgia icon, Loran Smith. What you got, Loran? And everybody that's ever been associated with Georgia football and listened to the radio, this is, I guess, how he first came to fame as a sideline reporter. He's done a lot more than that. But, Loran, thank you so much for doing this.
Delighted to be with you today, Bruce, and look forward to our conversation.
I interviewed your friend, Jim Mentor, who was a long time, I think that was back in December, but I interviewed him. Long-time Atlanta Journal, Atlanta Constitution. You guys were good friends. He tells some great stories. I know you got a lot of fond memories of Jim, right?
Well, Jim was not only a terrific writer, he very, very capable and get to the point, and he's a good reporter. He had a nose for news if he needed it, but he liked a lot of down home, sitting by the fireplace, old dogs, watermelon wine, they say.
Yeah.
He really got a big kick out of owning a bird dog. and he got a big kick out of quail hunting. We used to go quail hunting at Callaway Gardens back when Hal Northup was running the operation there. And Jim and I shared a lot of good times over Georgia football, both practice and games. And then we began to see one another socially, and I haven't seen him as much lately. He doesn't get out as much as he used to, but he's still active.
Yeah.
And my goodness, is that mind of his sharp as ever.
Yeah, it is. He's got some great stories. We could get into all that, but we won't. But and a lot of the stories he tells with you in the story, so it's pretty cool. So I got to know you, and I'm not sure. I think I know a little bit of your story, but where you became famous to me anyway as a sideline reporter on the radio for UGA football games, and that was back before all the games were televised. Hardly none of them were televised. And if you didn't go to the game, you listened to Larry Munson and his sidekick, Loran Smith, on the sideline. What you got, Loran, is what Larry always says. And I know you had other things you did in Athens. You were actually an athlete. You came there from Wrightsville, Georgia as an athlete, right? But I want to get back to that, but you ended up being the sideline reporter for Munson, and that was a pretty famous gig you had because people heard you every week, right?
Yeah, well, I guess it's you can sort of compare it to the scene that I read about. I didn't experience it firsthand in Los Angeles. You know, when the Dodgers went west, they had a very good announcer, Vin Scully, who I got to know, and he was a friend. But there was no television in California, and so everybody listened to Vin Scully. And Munson was the same way. We didn't have television like as late as 1980 when Georgia won the national championship. The first game on television was with South Carolina, so that was like the 8th or 9th game of the season. I'd have to look at them.
That was Herschel against George Rogers, right? I remember that game.
Yeah, exactly. So you heard Munson, and that was it. Of course, before Munson, there was Ed Thelenius, who was very popular with the Georgia fans. And believe it or not, Munson wasn't very popular in the beginning because, first of all, he replaced Thelenius, who was an icon, and in this state, had that golden voice. He sounded like he might have swallowed Walter Cronkite, and Georgia people were used to him, and they were comfortable with him. And Munson was different. He sounded different, and nobody ever knew or saw Larry Munson when he started out. But one of the things that made him popular, other than he was just a very outstanding announcer, had great talent, was that Dan McGill took a liking to Munson, and he walked down to Vince Dooley's office one Sunday morning. We all worked on Sundays. Of course, everybody does now, but Dan and I went over on Sunday mornings. Of course, I had a time where I found a way to work in church. Dan worked in yard work, so he went to work in the yard, and I went to church. And I remember him walking down to Vince's office and said, "You know, this guy Munson is pretty dadgum good." So Dan began taking tapes of the games from WRFC, and
I remember that station, that AM station in Athens. Yep.
Yeah, and excerpting highlights. Munson's best calls, you know, they obviously had to do with great games. And what happened was Vince's teams were never out of it. They might not have won every game, but they were always in it, or that was what it seemed to be. So Dan put those excerpts together. He cut up the tapes and created highlight tapes and market them. And I remember one year, you will laugh at the results I'm going to give you, but one year, Dan was so proud, we made $18,000 on Munson tapes. Well, that was
a lot of money. Yeah.
That was a lot of money back in 1980, 81, in those years. So that's how Munson began to grow on people. And he lived in Nashville at the time. He ultimately moved to Athens, but he lived in Nashville. And he drove down on Friday, stayed at the old Ramada Inn on Broad Street, and he'd get up, walk to the game, do the no, he didn't walk to the game in his early years. He parked outside the press box. McGill and then Claude Felton gave him the best parking he could get. And that was for him to make his getaway and beat the traffic. So he got out of town, got on the road, drove back to Nashville. We didn't play any night games to speak of.
Sure, for sure.
Kentucky did, and Mississippi State, we played them in Jackson a lot at night. So out there in the western part of the conference, Mississippi, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, and LSU, they played a lot of night games, but nobody else did. So Munson, nobody actually knew Larry Munson because they didn't see him. All they did, they heard him, and they had to adjust to him because they were so used to a different voice than Ennis, which I've already pointed out. So I once wrote that Munson knew more state troopers than he did Georgia football fans. But then he came to Atlanta, and he was doing news and sports for a station in Tennessee. He was doing television. He was doing the nightly news, the 6 o'clock news. And that didn't work out. And you remember Officer Don with WSB, who did the kiddie show on Saturday morning. He was very popular in the state. Everybody, particularly in Atlanta. So Officer Don started a statewide network, the Georgia Network, I think he called it. There was a competing network, GNN, which everybody called Grins. So Officer Don started this network, and he talked Munson into coming down and being a multi-purpose announcer. He got up in the morning, he got to the station first, opened the doors, made the coffee. He did news, weather, and sports. That's when Munson began to grow on people, and he did a lot of speaking because his job was not a high-paying job. He did a lot of speaking across the state, and he didn't get great fees, but hell, if he was speaking in Valdosta and he had to be on the air the next morning at 5:30, you can imagine how much sleep he got or didn't get.
Right, for sure.
So that and those tapes by Dan McGill is what really got Munson early on connected.
How did you get hooked up with him?
Well, I actually had a sales relationship with a network producer who was a guy named Richard Frick out of New York. He actually lived up in on Round Hill Road in Greenwich, Connecticut was his home. I've stayed in his home a bunch of times, but old Dick was a wonderful guy. And he had a partner named Jerry Johnson, and Jerry retired, and Dick took it over. But he packaged the games for Texaco, and it included LSU, Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, and Florida, I think, originally. Might have been another one, and he did some. And then he did a thing called Pick a Dixie. That was choosing games at night. So there's a lot of LSU games on night, highlighted by that great call of Billy Cannon going, 93 yards? It was a long run, punt return against Ole Miss in Baton Rouge on Halloween night. And used to know the year, but it was in the 70s. But he really had it going. Of course, Texaco eventually got out of that. The way Jerry Johnson got it going was he sold Texaco an opera. I remember WGAU in Athens. They had an opera on Saturday morning. Well, nobody listened to the opera except in a university town. A lot of people did. And I didn't listen to it because I was a country boy from Middle Georgia, and I didn't know what the opera was, except I could spell it. So it turned out to be a connection in Texaco. Saw the growth of college football, and particularly in the South, where the passion was really overwhelming, even in the 50s. I can tell you, back in the 50s, Georgia football was great, and we weren't winning.
Right.
We didn't have our best teams. Coach Butts had fallen on hard times and made a big comeback in 59. So Jerry Johnson and Dick Frick, they had the Pick a Dixie and had all the Georgia networks. And so one day I saw Dick a lot, and I started going in the 70s to New York every December, the first week in December. The National Football Foundation and College Hall of Fame had its annual dinner, and it was a black tie dinner at the Waldorf, and they honored sitting presidents a time or two, I think, and it just was a fabulous event. So I'd go up for it, and I'd stay a few days, and then I'd go by and visit with Dick Frick. He had a membership in a very, very outstanding club, the Brook Club. I mean, if you were in the Brook Club, you were really uptown. So I was in there, mixed in with a lot of business moguls.
Right.
And there was an actor or two. I remember having dinner one night, late afternoon, having drinks. And it was just a wonderful experience. So we had lunch one day at the Brook Club, and I said to Dick, we need to do something to promote Georgia football. So we need to do an extended pregame show. So I talked him into considering it. And I said, he says, well, I'd like to get you to help me. So why don't we need somebody he knew, some producer like himself for another school, had a sideline announcer. I said, I'd like for you to be the sideline announcer. And that's how it started. But before that, I had a lot of conversations with Vince about a post-game show. Nobody in the SEC had a live locker room show. So Vince began getting proposals, and he'd ask me to evaluate it. And one day I said, Vince, these proposals are really good, but nobody has a sponsor. So I went out and got Pat Kraft Mills, because of a great Georgia alumnus, Ivy Chandler, and we put together a locker room show. And so I had to work with Dick Frick on that. I mean, I was a fish out of water. I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I had a stopwatch and a format sheet and a commercial guide. I had everything, statistic sheet. And then Vince was so good, I'd ask him the first question. He'd analyze the whole game. I didn't have a question to ask. So then at the end of the season, I went over to WSB, and I had sold them on taking the show. We had no show if we didn't have them taking it. And it didn't appear on any of the other stations. That led to the tailgate show, however. So Dick put it together, and we had it was very successul, but I was so uncomfortable. I did not feel like I knew what I was doing. So WSB general, the advertising manager, I think he'd been the general sales manager. His first name was Lee. What was Lee's last name? Lee. I went over and I said, look, I feel like I was a fish out of water. I didn't know what I was doing. But if you'll stick with me, I'll get the hang of it, something like that. And he said, no, you did a good enough job. We like the show. And always remember that a sold show is a good show. And that's how I got in the radio business.
You said something that's very important. A lot of people start off, and a lot of people don't get this in life, is that you were in over your head, but you jumped in it and you did something that you were very uncomfortable with. And most people, or at least many people I meet, don't ever jump in because they don't want to be uncomfortable. So here you did something and you felt like a fish out of water, but my goodness, look what's happened in your career because you did that. That's an amazing story. So going back to Munson, my understanding, you mentioned he didn't know many people, but he was pretty much an introvert outside of the booth. Is that right? he didn't have exactly the same personality outside of the booth that he did in it. Is that correct or not?
Well, I think that's very true, and he had very few friends, meaning he didn't socialize. But he did develop special friendships with some people, like Charlie Whittemore. He was a receiver coach, but this came about after Charlie retired from the Athletic Association. He had been a coach, and he wound up in facility management. But Charlie was a great guy, and still is. I see him at basketball games now. And he really was an outstanding player for us and a very good coach. And Charlie and his wife, Debbie, they were great friends of Larry Munson. And now see, he felt comfortable in a one-on-one environment like that. But he really was an introvert. I think
you were also close friends with him, right? You guys had a close relationship over the years. I think you've written about that, right?
Well, I wrote a book about him, but not really. Not really. It wasn't a matter of any kind of emotion. It's just that he and I went in different directions. During the week, I had to turn to do all the selling and manage all the other activities I was involved with. Now, we did go fishing once, and I wrote a column which the Atlanta Journal ran, which caused a lot of reaction. I mean, I quoted him, and it was accurate. He would say, "We got a north wind. We've got a wind coming out of the north. I don't like it. Driving these bass down 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 feet."
He was amazing.
His family pretty much was grown. He actually had two families. He had first family, and his wife. That wife could not bear children, so they adopted kids. And then his second wife, who lived in Marietta, they had a couple of kids. But once they got up college age, and I think a divorce came about, and then Larry didn't have a family. Well, I did, so I had to go home. And then he started that movie thing with the Georgia co-eds, and that wound up giving him something he did. But he didn't have a lot of friends because he just wasn't that social.
Yeah, he was a talented guy in that booth, I can tell you that. What are some of your favorite calls, or his greatest calls? I'm sure you've written about all that. Some of them come to your mind. I think I probably heard most of them. Is there anything that jumps out?
Well, Beluga Scott, of course, because that
right.
beat Florida and meant that we had an opportunity to win the national championship, when having lost that game would have meant we would not have had that opportunity.
That's when he broke the chair in the booth, right?
Yeah. That was a good one. Of course, one of the calls that was not necessarily a great game, one of the calls was the Kentucky game up in Lexington, and Rex Robinson kicked a field goal that won the game, and he didn't say it was good. He just screamed, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah." Well, the significance of that to his career was so many people heard it. WSB's Clear Channel signal, 750 watts at night in Lexington, Kentucky. Gosh, every truck driver in the Midwest heard Larry Munson. And that call really made a terrific impact on everybody. And by that time, everybody loved Munson. They loved.
And he was just saying, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah."
Yeah, he never said it's good.
Wow.
So, but see, he ranked as one of the great announcers in the SEC, and but I've thought about that a lot. That he really did not have any competition. Nobody saw any of Georgia's games in 1980. Can you believe it? Until we beat South Carolina.
That's amazing. And, I was right in the middle of that. I'd already graduated. Now, when I look back, I didn't realize it was just about all radio. I remember watching Herschel and George Rogers, both of them Heisman candidates, playing each other, and I watched that on TV. I wasn't even at the game, but that was on TV. But I didn't think about most of those games were just on radio, wasn't it? I knew that when I was in school, obviously in the early '70s, but I didn't realize what year or years that started changing, started becoming TV. You know, one of the things that you mentioned that Larry he had big shoes to fill when he became the announcer, and we're going to move off of Larry in just a minute, but since we're talking about it, so I think about Scott Howard and Eric Zier and now DJ Shockley on the sidelines. They had big shoes to fill, but, you know, they've been accepted too. Their voices are becoming very familiar, but I'm sure that was an interesting time as they Scott especially began to take Munson's place, right?
Well, Scott Howard is a terrific announcer.
I agree.
Now, he announces based on what the textbook suggests. He gives you down and distance. Munson, if you ever had a critic, it was those people who would say, well, you know, when I listen to him, I don't know where the dadgum line of scrimmage is.
Right.
And some of that had to do with Larry's extemporaneous comments about the stadium, the weather, and all of that.
Yep.
And we had a problem, you know, in those days where we could not do the bowl games. If ABC television did the Sugar Bowl, for example, and we were playing in it, that meant that ABC radio got to do the radio broadcast too. That we later were successful in getting to take the home game announcers, and that became standard. But for example, WRFC was now a network station in Athens, and if we played in a game that CBS did, WRFC's competitor, WGAU, they're now under the same roof. They're both Cox stations now. But WGAU got to do this CBS broadcast. It wasn't Munson. So that caused real problems. So Larry didn't get to do some of those games. But we got all that changed. But I think Scott Howard is a terrific announcer. He's very much on top of things.
Yeah, well, they're all good. It's a good combo, but I know he had to feel a little pressure following Munson coming in. He was already in the booth with Munson before he took over, wasn't he? Wasn't he already working? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, so that meant people knew about him. Scott Howard, he's on top of things. He's got a good, strong voice. Very, very authoritative kind of voice.
Yeah. Oh, he's good. They're all good. I remember, obviously, Zaire and Shockley were quarterbacks and the team, so they got the following. They got the credibility.
Scott Howard just really had a great voice, and he studies, he works. He doesn't hang out at practice because he has other roles, other responsibilities. And then he does Kirby's call-in show, or whatever we do. We do so much now, I've forgotten what goes on. Scott just, and he's a good guy, doesn't have an ego, and then those two quarterbacks, they don't have an ego, so there's nothing of a rivalry there like I hear about in other networks over the years.
Yeah, they act like they have fun, and that obviously spills over and the people listening have fun. They're very good, and I always think about it's a miracle because filling Larry's shoes and coming in and doing that, and it's been as smooth and as great as they've become is a whole nother story. So I think I'm right, and you can tell me that you're the only person I would imagine on earth that can say this. You got a lot of knowledge and stories of UGA and football and sports and all that, but you have worked. I'm counting 7 different UGA football coaches, from Wally Butts to Johnny Griffith to Vince to Ray Goff to Jim Donald to Mark Richt to Kirby Smart. Isn't that true? I mean, you've worked with 7 different football coaches and had a close relationship with all of them, right?
Yeah, I didn't have a athletic association role with Coach Butts, but I knew him, and I wrote about him, and I spent time with him. So yes, you're right. I have had a relationship dating back to Coach Butts. That tells you how old I am.
Well, that's amazing. I'm sure. I don't know who else could say that. I don't know, but that's pretty neat that you've been in the middle of all that. I know that. I think Jim Mentor told a story, and I think you were involved in it when Wally Butts was there, and then the coach from Notre Dame come down to watch them practice or something. And you remember that story? Or
Yeah, Frank Leahy and Coach Butts developed a friendship. And so Frank Leahy visited Coach Butts' practices. I think they might have gotten acquainted through the Rules Committee, which Coach Butts was on. And I can't remember if Leahy was on it, but somehow or other he got to know Leahy. And when Leahy became coach of the college all-star game, which was a big deal in the 50s, when Leahy coached it, he invited Coach Butts to be an assistant coach. So they had a very close relationship.
I remember stories that in our little town of Reynolds, when Coach Butts was out, recruiting or whatever, they had a little Reynolds pharmacy, had a little fountain. He'd always stop at the Reynolds pharmacy. So I remember people that older than me, and some of them are still living, but that remember Wally Butts stopping in, and very friendly guy stopping in the Reynolds pharmacy when he come through town. I guess you just have places you stop. But you also had a really long time friendship with Vince Dooley. And, I mean, he was around a long time. When you think of him, what do you think? Tell me what your perception is of Vince Dooley as a person, his coaching philosophy, or the way he won football games mainly on the ground. Just talk a little bit about Vince.
Well, Vince was a very intellectual type. He had an interest in a lot of things. He was a master gardener, a historian. He wrote books, and he really enjoyed in a second career. He's a little bit like Tom Brokaw, who had a second career writing books and doing things in the journalism field once he left NBC. So I don't know who else would be a great example, but Vince's second career was really something, and that because of two or three things. One is that he wanted to stay in athletics because it was the vehicle that defined his career.
Sure.
So he wasn't coaching, which took so much out of him, and while he was happy to get away from it, I think he missed it. But by being involved the way he became involved enabled him to stay close to the game and kept him in. He became chairman of the Rules Committee himself. That's one of his big deals. He believed in running the football because that's what he learned under Shug Jordan at Auburn, was the importance of a sound running game. Now, he played quarterback, so he wasn't opposed to the forward pass, but he felt like that he threw the ball to set up the running game. His style would not work today, but see, if he came along today, he would. If somebody asked me, would he be successful today? I said, well, no, not if he ran the same offense he ran then, but if he were coaching today, he wouldn't run that same offense.
No, he wouldn't. No question about it. He knew too much about football. That's true.
He would have found a way.
Yeah. Folks, we're listening to Loran Smith. He is a University of Georgia icon, and we're going to come right back. Loran is from Wrightsville, Georgia. Another famous Georgia football player named Herschel Walker came from Wrightsville, so I've got to ask him about Herschel as we get into this. You stay tuned. I got to ask you about Herschel. It had to be special for you coming from the same town, Wrightsville, Georgia. Is he the best player you've seen since you've been there? What's your thoughts?
Oh yeah, I think Herschel would be the best player. Of course, I saw Fran Tarkenton was not only was I in school when he was in school. We became great friends right on up to this very moment. And I spent a lot of time with him, and I have met and talked to people like Bud Grant, his coach at Minnesota,
Right.
Minneapolis, who said that he was the greatest. And some people have said that he was the greatest, but he probably doesn't get his due because he's 0-3 in Super Bowls. His team's never won a Super Bowl. It used to just grind on him, but it doesn't anymore. I think he's finally looked at and I don't know that this influenced him, but I wrote about him. I put in the story that someday he'll probably look at his career like Ted Williams. Ted Williams never won a World Series, and I got to know Ted Williams briefly, and I asked him about that, and he said, well, it was a disappointment, but I feel like my body of work will define my career in this, and nothing
And it did.
that's
Yep.
never been truer,
Yeah,
more
absolutely.
appropriately spoken.
Yeah.
And I think Fran looks at it today, but I do believe that his not having won a Super Bowl keeps him from getting his due. He did television. He's great in media. He's written books. He's made money. I wrote a story about him for Georgia Trend last year, and we put in there that he was worth $300 million, I think.
Gracious. He actually lives in Georgia, doesn't he? Live up in Clayton area in
No, he
Georgia?
lives in Atlanta. He's got an office in Buckhead.
Okay, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So he grinned at me and said, "Well, y'all didn't miss it much." So
That's great.
So, and he loves making deals. He loves his business set up. He's got pretty much half a floor in Tower Place in Buckhead. I go there to see him quite often, and he is really keeps up. And Peyton Manning did one of his shows with him recently. He and Archie talk every week, and I talk to each one of them myself. So I have a conversation about I don't say every week, but 2 or 3 times a month I usually reach out to Archie, and then about twice that much. I do talk to Tarkenton. During football season, I talk to him every day.
You've built some relationships with a lot of folks in your role over the years. That is unbelievable. But it had to be a source of pride when Herschel was on the scene coming from your hometown. Just talk about that.
Yeah, I tell everybody there have been 2 athletes from Wrightsville, Georgia, to letter at the University of Georgia. One was a runner and one was a walker. But that's not fair. Russ Tanner, who played football for Coach Rick, Russ, and he's in the media business. He has a little show in the fall. Russ was a terrific high school football player, great lineman, and had a wonderful career with the Dogs. So I told that story one time. Russ was in the audience, and after the meal, he came up to me and said, "You're going to have to change your story." He's from Wrightsville, and he also lettered. But I used the original story just to because of the punchline.
Sure.
The way it works. But I discovered Herschel, and what happened was in 1977, I guess. It was after the 1976 season when Ray Goff had the good year, SEC Player of the Year. I took him to Wrightsville and arranged for him to speak to the Wrightsville touchdown club or quarterback club, or just it was a high school banquet. That's what it was.
Right.
It was a high school banquet, and he spoke, and everybody really enjoyed it. And Ralph Jackson, a family friend who's a very successful farmer, agribusiness type, he and I were sitting together, and the row of tables that extended down the room in our line of sight was the kid, and he pointed him out. Says, "You see that boy down there?" Says, "His name's Herschel Walker. Better go back and tell Coach Dooley he is going to be some athlete." So they already knew about him because he was big and strong. He could outrun everybody.
Yeah, run over them or past them. Yeah, either way.
So then I tell this story. I came back and I told our coaches about him, and they started laughing. "Y'all play football down there in Wrightsville?" They gave me a hard time. The next spring, Herschel ran 9.7 in a track meet, so everybody lit out for Wrightsville.
That's unbelievable. What a story. What a story.
But Herschel, he was just an exceptional person, and he really did have a great ability to communicate. Like I went with him, Claude Felton and I did. I think Coach Dooley went to New York for the Heisman. Well, Coach Dooley might not have been on our flight. But anyway, I sat by Herschel going up to New York, and then after he was on Good Morning America, and on that show, Joan London was the co-host.
Yep, I remember her, yeah.
And she recited all of his yardage, how many yards he gained, game, season, career, those kinds of stats. And she said to him, "Don't you get tired running all that much?" He said, "No, ma'am, the ball ain't so heavy." Well,
I remember that. I remember he said that. I forgot it was on Good Morning America, but I remember him saying.
So he had a little bit of a penchant for saying those kinds of things. Like after, I guess it was after his freshman year, the Canadian League made a run at him. And he stayed at Georgia and it didn't turn his head. And he said, "Well, it doesn't make sense to grow up in one country and play football in another." Well, I told Vince, I said, "You could have gotten the top 50 PR guys and corporate PR guys in America, and they couldn't come up with an answer."
That's true.
That was so significant as that was. So Herschel, he did a lot of those things. He was just a remarkable player, but he was a teammate of the first water. I still talk to his old teammates now and they always talk about how important his relationship was with the entire team. He handed the ball to the official. I bet he never spiked the ball his whole time playing in the NFL.
You couldn't tell whether he scored a touchdown by looking at him or he got tackled behind the line, which never happened. But you couldn't tell the difference. He just took it in stride.
Yeah.
He never danced around. He never did anything. Boy, there's a lesson in that too. I can tell you that. Let me ask you. Kirby has been so doggone successful there. What's making him so successful? What are your thoughts on what Kirby's doing at Georgia? It's been incredible, for sure.
Well, he is a very smart man. His surname defines him. He's very, very smart. And he has an indefatigable work energy.
I don't know how he does it. I don't know how those guys keep up. Not just him, but those guys. That is a relentless job, isn't it? I mean, it's 7 days a week. Yeah.
But he has only two interests: coaching and his family. He'll only make exceptions to his family, like his youngest kid, Andrew, is a pretty good athlete. He'll find a way to get to his games.
I actually saw him play in Warner Robins this year.
Yeah.
And he hit a home
run. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw it in the World Series or whatever you call it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
after that, I wrote him a letter telling him, make sure he understood that when he got all these big league offers, that I want to be his agent.
he may too. He stood out. He really did stand out there as an athlete as I'm watching him from the stands. But yeah. So anyway, back to Kirby. He's focused on what makes him successful, right?
Yeah, he knows that what he's got to do to win is to do what he's doing and try to do it better every year. He likes golf, but he isn't thinking about golf maybe one or two times a year. He likes to quail hunt, but he can't get to it more than once or twice a year. And I mean, he's literally working every day of the year, except for those times in like spring holidays. He'll go somewhere he traditionally has, like the Caribbean, with his family. And then he gets away, and it's just him and his family. And nobody else can get into that relationship. He's not socializing with neighbors, friends, sponsors. Nobody can get to Kirby when he's with his family.
Well, that's the way it should be. He has a place at Lake Oconee. We have a cottage there, and I've never seen him there. I know where the house is, but he doesn't get there much.
Well, he does in the spring, like when the weather warms. He's there almost every weekend. But what he does is he takes his family, and he did take his mother and dad, and he's got a sister and a brother, so there's a lot of family outings there.
His dad just passed away. I knew.
Yes, it was so unfortunate. Sonny was a good man, and I enjoyed him very much over the years. I'd see him every game on the sideline, and he had a seat up in a box where it's air conditioned and got all kinds of refreshment in arm's length.
But he just stayed on the field, right?
Yeah, I said, Sonny, why aren't you down up in that box where you can enjoy that cool air and a Coca-Cola and whatever else they're serving? He said, well, everybody up there seems to think they know more football than I do, so I come down here so I can enjoy the game by myself.
And he's a coach, too, all his life, and an icon of a coach. So talking about that, I got to ask you, well, what's your thoughts on this name, image, likeness thing and how that's changing football? I have to ask you that. I mean, it's, to me, gosh, I understand these guys got to get paid, and they should get paid, but how much money's in it, but it's scary what's happening. What are your thoughts?
Well, naturally, it's out of control. Naturally, that it's out of control is the problem. You can't blame a kid, and the courts have established that you can't not pay them. And I don't think anybody now, I think about it though, 10 years ago, even if you bought a kid a Coca-Cola and a hamburger, you technically were in violation. It was too strict. And the NCAA had some wrong-headed leadership. And I think I'm right. The next lawsuit the NCAA wins will be their first one. And it just was too restrictive. But it grew out of the traditional amateur standing that we all grew up with. You remember that Jim Thorpe lost his medals because he got paid $50 or it might have been less than that to play in a semi-pro game. Had to give up his Olympic medals. That was nuts, but that's how strict it was. And I can remember in golf, a lot of people who played golf, if they did,
couldn't make a dime. Yep.
Yeah. If you did, your amateur status was null and void. Well, it was too restrictive, but now it's too loose and too open-ended. So, but if coaches are going to make $10 million a year, how can you tell a kid he can't get a royalty off his jersey when it's bought at the bookstore?
Somebody's got to be smart enough to figure out how to make it so people there's no commitment to anybody. You know that's not good for these kids, saying I commit, but I'm going to leave the first time I realize I don't play. There's got to be some parameters around it. It's got to go. I know we're going to run out of time here. I got to ask you, I know you've written or either co-written over a dozen books. You're a prolific author, and I've read several of your books. Do you have a favorite of your books you've written? And I also know you, based on our communications getting ready for this, that you're currently writing another book. So just talk about your books a minute.
Well, I co-authored a book with Louis Grizzard after the 1980 National Championship called Glory, Glory, and that book was very, very successful, and I really enjoyed that. But I really did have a great sense of accomplishment 2 years ago when I wrote a book with Kirby on the first national championship. It's called How About Them Dogs? The publisher talked me into that, but I didn't like that in the beginning. I figured, well, the story ought to be what people be attracted to. But I really enjoyed doing that book because I did something like 50 sidebars of vignettes with the players on the team. And that was when NIL was just beginning to come about.
Right.
So I probably got away with getting inside the in-depth stories about kids before. Now, if I went to some kids wouldn't. Gunnar Stockton, for example, the heir apparent at quarterback, I think he would be part of a book project. But most kids are going to say, do I get paid? Not so much that it's that big a deal for them. It's their agents. Their agents say, hey, that guy going to write about you, make him pay.
Right.
So I just think it's gone too far, and that's what usually happens in the world. The pendulum swings too far left, and at some point it's going to swing right.
That is true.
Vice versa.
What book are you writing now, Loran?
I'm doing a book on John McMullen, who's one of the greatest Georgia alumni ever. His dad was a county agent, and John became an accountant, made a lot of money, given more money, university officials will say, to more different things than any alumnus. Just a wonderful fellow. Unfortunately, unexpected to us, he died 2 weeks ago.
Oh.
But I got all the interviewing done. I had no sense of urgency. I had no concern. I didn't think about him leaving us, but that happened. But I'm fortunate, very glad that we did get that done.
What's the name of the book?
Well, we hadn't given it a name.
Hadn't given it yet. So let me ask you this. I'm going to wind it up, but I also know you're a philanthropist. You have the Loran Smith Center for Cancer Support with your wife, Myrna. Tell the story behind that. How did you start this Loran Smith Center for Cancer Support?
Well, I didn't really start it, and I don't have any investment in it because I never made any money. I tell everybody I live good, and I don't want to change that, but I don't have any wealth to be doing that kind of thing. So the Athens General Hospital put that together with some local people in the community, and it really is a sort of a comfort station, I guess, for those who've got cancer and going through a tough situation. They wanted to do things where they could come and learn about the disease, learn what their options were, and it was just as I say, a very, very strong comfort environment. And then they have since done more, and it really there's lodging now. If you're got a loved one stricken with cancer and you want to be with them, sometimes people can't afford a motel room.
Right.
So there's the facility to do that kind of thing. So
Have you had cancer? Did you have?
Yes, I have. I'm a leukemia survivor, thank goodness.
I think I remember Jim Mentor telling a story when you were down. You had an episode. Something happened, and you were determined to still go hunting that afternoon. When I guess early on in that, I thought I remembered that.
Yeah.
So that's special to your heart for sure. So
yes.
I want to ask you one final question. When it's all said and done, And, we're all here temporarily. One day we're going to all be gone from here. There'll be people listening to this that after we're dead and gone, once it gets out there, this stuff is out there. What do you want people to remember about Loran Smith?
Well, I don't know. I guess I would say that I am a country boy, barefoot, and know what a cotton strap is like. Grew up in austere condition, and because of the great University of Georgia, the Georgia people took me in because I was affiliated with the Bulldogs, and I've had a wonderful, wonderful life. And I love this state, and I love its people, and I feel like I'm really one fortunate person. So I hope they appreciate the fact that education is the thing that can solve most of our problems, and that universities like Georgia do a lot to make that happen.
Well, I can tell you, you're a household name with the University of Georgia family, and that is a big family. That is for sure. And I've never heard anything but positive about you. I've never heard in my life negative, and I keep up with Georgia football, I can promise you. But I've never heard anything but positive about you. You come from this little town, Wrightsville. You come as a track and field athlete. You kind of stay for the rest of your career. I know you had no idea, and nobody knows what path that's out there for you, and you just don't know what's going to happen. But you kept doing the best next thing, and you've had a wonderful life and impacted a lot of people. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking the time to talk to this undertaker today. This has been great fun for me to hear you and to listen. We could go on and on. I know you got stories. I mean, we didn't even talk about Louis Grizzard and all his stuff, and there's so much stuff we could talk about, but I can't take up any more of your time. But thank you so much, Loran, for doing this. I appreciate it very much.
Okay, Bruce, thank you very much. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you, sir.
Viewing life from a hearse, it could be worse. Laugh, think, and cry with the country undertaker.